joining us right now. He'll be speaking over at Texas Tech University tomorrow evening from 5:30 to 7 p.m. Former U.S. Congressman Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, welcome to the Chad Hasty Show on KFYO.
Chad, nice to be with you today. Thank you.
I appreciate you giving us some time today and calling in, and looking forward to your speech here in Lubbock tomorrow. Tell us a little bit about, first, what you've been up to since your retirement.
Well, I'm doing a lot of speaking on campuses, which I like to do. We always, over the years, have had support from young people, and I think they are more interested in cleaning up the mess, since I think they're realizing what they're inheriting, a lot of debt and not many good jobs out there. So the freedom message is very appealing. So I do a lot of that. I have an internet program that I do on a daily basis, and that's to mainly keep up on financial affairs, the Federal Reserve and how the markets are doing, as well as on civil liberties, and a lot of emphasis on foreign policy. So I have various groups. I have a Campaign for Liberty, which is involved in legislation and trying to get better legislation passed, and then a newer group is the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, which is a foreign policy institute trying to talk some people in this country to get involved in wars a lot less than they have been. So I'm staying pretty busy, but it's more on my time rather than on the time of John Boehner telling me when I had to be there to vote.
Well, since you brought him up, I'll go ahead and ask you before I ask you about what you'll be speaking about tomorrow. What are your thoughts on Speaker Boehner announcing his retirement, and do you have any thoughts on who or what type of person should be the next speaker?
Well, when he announced, I think most people were caught by surprise. I certainly was, and I was asked on TV, and I said, well, it's going to be more of the same. And even on my own program, I said it will be a continuation because the problems are overwhelming, and the message that is different than what's in Washington isn't very strong in Washington. I think that people are more attuned to changing, what we believe in when it comes to markets and monetary policy and foreign policy. But in Washington, it's all the same, so I had very low expectations. I continue to do that. I think there's 3 people running for speaker, and personalities may be a little different. The policies aren't going to change too much. I think there's a reason for that, and that we're at an impasse because you have liberals fighting conservatives. Both sides want to spend money, and they argue over how to do it. But quite frankly, we're broke, and they can't make deals and say, well, let's finance both sides. So they're in the trouble. The debt is too big, and the financial markets are saying we're in trouble, and the middle class is getting wiped out. So there's not one person that they could put in as a speaker and all of a sudden change things, because there's still a lot of people in this country, in spite of me seeing signs of optimism, especially with young people, there's still a lot of people out there that want stuff from the government, the welfare beneficiaries as well as, the rich welfare beneficiaries. There's a lot of welfare out there, and it's not just the poor people who are looking to get a hand up.
We're visiting with Dr. Ron Paul, former U.S. Congressman and former U.S. presidential candidate as well. You'll be speaking over at Texas Tech University from 5:30 to 7 p.m. Tomorrow, and I'm sure at 7 p.m. people will be saying, "Can you spend another hour?" What do you plan on talking about tomorrow?
Well, what I talk about all the time, and that is why, if we have a full understanding of individual liberty and a free society and limited government, why things would be much better off for us. So I emphasize where our liberties come from. It's individual. It's not groups. I don't like to deal in groups, and it always annoyed me in campaigning. A group would come up and say, "I'm part of this group. What are you going to do for us?" Whether it's a financial group or any type of special interest. Because I think if everybody gets their freedom and everybody is left alone and they're allowed to keep what they earn, everybody's going to be better off. And it doesn't matter what group you belong to. So the libertarian message, the freedom message, is really non-discriminatory, and the only thing that can be, because it doesn't look at people in groups. It looks at people as individuals, and everybody should have, equal rights under the law. But it doesn't mean that you have government trying to force on egalitarianism. And I think a lot of people don't understand the difference So I'll talk a lot about economics and foreign policy and personal liberty, all based on the principle of the non-aggression principle, and that is nobody's allowed to use force to have their way, governments nor individuals. And just think, if nobody initiated force, it'd be a pretty peaceful, prosperous world. But, of course, that's idealistic, and we have a long way to go. But that's quite a bit different than the acceptance of the principle of socialism, which right now seems to be pretty popular, unfortunately.
When you see, we're visiting with Dr. Ron Paul, and you just brought up socialism, you see on the Democratic side Bernie Sanders getting thousands of people turning out to his events, and people who are loving Bernie Sanders. And on one way, I at least respect that he calls himself a socialist. You've got Democrats out there who they'll just call themselves Democrat. At least Bernie Sanders says, man, no, I'm a democratic socialist. No problem there. Why do you think there are people, and there are a lot of younger people? You had a lot of younger people who supported you when you were running. Why do you see younger people, in your opinion, liking Bernie Sanders and liking that message? And why do you see that groundswell of support for a Bernie Sanders?
Well, I think it's because they haven't yet looked at the particulars, the real specifics of what a free society is like and how it differs from a socialist society. But there's something attractive about Bernie Sanders, and you've touched on it, and that is he's upfront. He tells the truth. He believes in something, and he's not going to flip-flop. When he started his campaign, he didn't all of a sudden soften his stand. He said, well, this country's not ready for socialism. So I think I'm going to just get away from that. But no, he stuck by it. And a lot of people might not even, they say, well, maybe his socialism is just, like Democrats because, he is a Democrat, too. He works for the Democrats. So they talk themselves into it. But I think what they like is a straight answer and somebody standing for something. But I think where the problem is understanding the difference. Economic difference. I mean, what does he want to do? Put tax rates up to 95% and the government run everything? I mean, that's what the 20th century was all about, the total failure of socialism, especially extreme socialism. And we've ushered in a new century, and there's a fight going on now between those who like government management versus those of us who would like to see us going in another direction. So there's a tug of war going on, and I'm interested in trying to get young people to study this and notice the difference. Yes, you want some people to tell you the truth, but you have to help sort out what is good policy and what is bad policy.
Visiting with Dr. Ron Paul, one of the things that you always liked talking about and celebrated was the Constitution. And you want people to learn the Constitution. Will you be speaking about any constitutional issues tomorrow?
Yeah, I always tie it into the Constitution because, of course, that is back to this honesty and integrity because that's the oath we take when we go into office. But once again, very few people in Washington follow the Constitution, but they think they do because it's an educational factor where they've been taught in many government schools, and what they hear is that the Constitution has to be a flexible document. It can't be overly rigid, so they paint us who want to obey the Constitution as being overly rigid, and they see this as a detriment. So they just, instead of changing the Constitution as they should, they just ignore it. Take this trade agreement that they just went through. They did this in a totally unconstitutional fashion. So irregardless of whether it's good or bad, I think it's horrible. But if it were good, they still are doing it the wrong way because only Congress can deal with trade laws, and yet they turn the power over to the president, and the president turns it over to an international body, and they do it in secrecy. So this is so abusive of the Constitution. Laws are written by the courts. Laws are written by the executive branch, and we have too many laws, and we have way too many people in prison these days. I see that prisons are full, so they're trying to figure out how are we going to release a few because we have so many prisoners. I say we have too many laws putting people in prison who haven't committed a violent crime.
Visiting with Dr. Ron Paul. Before I let you go, and I know you're busy, let's say you're in the Oval Office today. You're President Ron Paul. What are some moves that you could make immediately as president that would make this a more free society in your mind?
Well, there would be a few things you could do, but quite frankly, we still operate with a Congress, and it would be a job.
Do we? I mean, someone tell President Obama. I don't know about that.
Yeah. So, but then again, if a president is going to be a constitutional president, he's going to maybe use the executive order to abolish executive orders rather than writing new ones. But no, I think that what you have to do is first try to explain to people why less government is better. Then, under these circumstances, the most you can do is start vetoing bills and just say no more spending. We're not going to raise the spending. We're not going to raise the taxes, and we're not going to write any more regulations. And that the executive branch has that. The executive branch writes a lot more laws than Congress does because they write all the regulations. Congress gives them an open door policy. Here's a bill. Write all environmentalism. Look at what the executive branch does there. They just write laws willy-nilly, and they're very, very detrimental. Of course, I would do my very best to rein in the Federal Reserve in order to try to get the Federal Reserve to quit printing so much money. But that will take some doing because, technically the Congress is supposed to, they established the Federal Reserve, and it should be, stopped. But the best the president could do is watch the type of appointments either to the courts, or to the Federal Reserve.
Dr. Ron Paul, I think we could talk an hour at least about all of this. I appreciate your time today, and I hope to have you back on the show, hopefully during this presidential election, to talk more about free markets and freedom here in this country.
Wonderful, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's Dr. Ron Paul, who will be speaking over at Texas Tech, 5:30 to 7 p.m. tomorrow. Admission absolutely free, so you get to hear a little bit about what he talked about today and probably a lot more as well.